The crystal towers of Verdania gleamed like jewels against the purple sky as Commander Lyric stood on the observation deck of the orbital defense station. He watched his world burn below, while the dark shapes of enemy ships moved across the stars like a plague. The Void Hunters had arrived 3 days ago, and nothing the Zilani had thrown at them had worked. Their energy shields meant nothing to the strange weapons that twisted reality itself. Their beautiful ships cracked like glass under the assault of forces that should not exist. Lyrex pressed his scaled hand against the transparent aluminum window and felt the station shudder as another wave of hunter fighters swept past. The graceful curves of Zilani architecture were being torn apart by machines that cared nothing for beauty or life. Cities that had stood for 10,000 years were being reduced to raw materials to feed the endless hunger of the invaders. The floating gardens where his children had played were now twisted metal, falling like rain. The communication officer behind him spoke in the musical tones of their language, but the words were heavy with despair. Commander, the 4th Fleet has been destroyed. The hunters are moving toward the civilian evacuation zones. We estimate 6 hours before they reach the population centers. 6 hours. Lyrex closed his eyes and tried to imagine a way out, but there was none. The Zilani had never been warriors. They had spent their entire history as a species focused on art and philosophy, and the gentle sciences that made life beautiful. Their weapons were designed to disable, not destroy. Their ships were built for exploration, not war. They had no concept of the kind of brutality that was now consuming their world. "Sir, what are your orders?" The young officer was barely past his coming-of-age ceremony, but his eyes held the terrible wisdom that came from watching everything you loved die. The Zilani had always believed that intelligence and reason could solve any problem. They had been wrong. Lyrics turned from the window and walked to the central command console. The holographic displays showed the tactical situation in perfect detail. Red markers indicated hunter positions, while the few remaining blue dots that represented Zilani forces grew smaller by the minute. The orbital defense platforms were falling one by one. The planet's surface was covered in the dark spots that marked harvesting operations. Soon there would be nothing left of Verdania but an empty shell. "Activate the emergency beacon," Lyric said quietly. The words felt strange in his mouth because the beacon had never been used in living memory. It was an ancient system built by their ancestors when the galaxy was younger and more dangerous. A call for help that would reach every star system within 500 light-years. The communication officer stared at him. "Sir, the beacon will reveal our location to every species in this sector. The protocol stated should only be used when facing complete extinction. Look around you, officer. What do you think this is?" Lyrex gestured at the tactical display where the last of their defensive fleet was being systematically destroyed. "Send the message on all frequencies. Maximum power. Let the entire galaxy know what is happening here." The officer's hands moved across the control surface with practiced precision. Ancient circuits that had slept for millennia came alive with purpose. Deep in the station's core, massive transmitters began to draw power from the fusion reactors. The beacon had been designed by a more paranoid generation of Zilani, who understood that sometimes survival required asking for help from strangers. "Message ready, sir. What should we transmit?" Lyrex thought about all the words he could say. He could tell the galaxy about Zilani culture and their contributions to art and science. He could describe the beauty of their world and the tragedy of its destruction. He could try to convince other species that the hunters would come for them next. But looking at the devastation around him, he realized that none of that mattered. "We are the Zilani. We are dying. If anyone receives this, please help us." The officer transmitted the message, and Lyrics felt the deck vibrate as the powerful signal burst out into space at faster than light speeds. Somewhere in the galaxy, other beings would receive their plea. Species with vast fleets and terrible weapons would hear the call and decide whether the Zilani were worth saving. History would judge what happened next. The message reached the proud Altarians first. Their High Chancellor read the transmission in his crystal palace and dismissed it with barely a thought. The Altarians had never lost a war in their 5,000-year history, and they saw no profit in risking their ships for a species weak enough to fall to the hunters. Let the Zilani learn the harsh lessons of galactic politics. In the computer cores of the Nexus Empire artificial intelligences calculated the odds of successfully engaging Void Hunter forces and found them unacceptable. The Empire had survived for millennia by making logical decisions based on mathematical certainty. There was no logical reason to sacrifice their resources for beings they had never met. The mystical ethereals received the plea in their dimensional sanctuaries and debated its meaning in languages that existed only in pure thought. They decided that intervention would disrupt the cosmic balance and retreated deeper into their meditative states. The death of one species was simply part of the greater cycle of existence. Species after species heard the desperate call and turned away. Some from cowardice, some from calculation, and some from simple indifference. The galaxy was vast and full of suffering. The Zilani were just another entry in the long catalogue of civilizations that had risen and fallen among the stars. But the message continued to spread, reaching systems that barely registered on the galactic map. In a small solar system on the outer rim of the galaxy, the signal was detected by a primitive array of radio telescopes and quantum receivers. Dr. Lisa Carter was working the night shift at the Deep Space Communications Center when her instruments picked up the transmission. She had been searching for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence for most of her career without success. Now intelligence had found her. The translation software struggled with the alien language, but the meaning was clear enough. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, an entire civilization was crying out for help. Lisa stared at her computer screen for a long moment, then reached for the secure phone that connected her to Space Command. Someone needed to know about this, and she had a feeling that humanity was about to make its first real impression on the galaxy. On Verdania, Commander, Lyrax watched another city fall to the hunters and wondered if anyone was listening. General Frank Morrison stood in the Pentagon's most secure conference room, staring at the translation that had arrived from the Deep Space Communications Center 6 hours ago. The message was simple, but its implications were staggering. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and their new neighbors were dying. Around the oval table sat the most important people in America's space program, all trying to process what this meant for the human race. Admiral Kate Sullivan was the first to speak. She had commanded naval forces in 3 different conflicts and understood the weight of the decision they were facing. The signal originated from the Kepler 442 system approximately 400 light-years from Earth. Our deep space telescopes show massive energy signatures consistent with orbital bombardment. Whatever's happening over there, it's happening fast. Dr. Ryan Torres leaned forward in his chair. He was young for his position as head of experimental propulsion, but his work on faster-than-light travel had earned him a seat at this table. The message mentioned something called void hunters. Based on the energy readings we're detecting, this isn't a conventional war. The scale of destruction suggests weapons that can crack planets. Colonel Alex Rodriguez had spent his career preparing for threats to national security, but nothing had prepared him for this. We need to consider the possibility that responding to this message could expose Earth to the same fate. If these hunters are as dangerous as the data suggest, making contact might be signing our own death warrant. The debate continued for hours as military officers and scientists tried to understand what they were dealing with. The Zilani transmission had included technical data about their attackers, and none of it was encouraging. The Void Hunters appeared to be a mechanical species that consumed entire star systems to fuel their expansion across the galaxy. They had been doing this for millions of years, and no known civilization had ever successfully stopped them. Dr. Torres pulled up holographic displays showing humanity's current space capabilities. The comparison was not encouraging. Earth's most advanced spacecraft could barely reach the outer planets of their own solar system. The idea of traveling 400 light-years to engage an enemy that could destroy worlds seemed impossible. But Torres had been working on something that might change that equation. Project Hercules has been classified above top secret for the past 5 years, Torres said, as he activated a new set of displays. We've been reverse engineering technology recovered from the Roswell incident and several other crash sites. The propulsion systems we've developed are completely theoretical, but our models suggest they could work. The room fell silent as Torres explained the Alcubierre drive that his team had been building in secret. By manipulating spacetime itself, a spacecraft could theoretically travel faster than light without violating the laws of physics. The technology was barely understood and completely untested at interstellar distances, but it represented humanity's only chance of reaching the Zilani. In time to help, Admiral Sullivan studied the technical specifications with growing excitement. How long would it take to reach the Kepler system with this drive? Our calculations suggest 3 weeks if the drive works as designed, Torres replied. But we've never tested it beyond the orbit of Jupiter. We could build a ship and crew it for an interstellar mission, but we'd be flying blind into unknown space with untested technology. Colonel Rodriguez raised the obvious concern. And if the drive fails, we lose our crew and potentially expose Earth's location to hostile forces. The risk assessment is off the charts. The debate might have continued indefinitely, but General Morrison received a priority call from the White House president. Helen Brooks wanted to see the senior staff immediately. Within an hour, the same group found themselves in the Oval Office briefing the Commander-in-Chief on humanity's first contact with alien intelligence president. Brooks listened to the briefing without interruption, then asked the question that would define humanity's future. What kind of force would we need to make a difference against these hunters? Dr. Torres had been running simulations since receiving the Zalani message. Based on their technical data, the hunters rely on energy shields and exotic particle weapons. Our nuclear arsenal and kinetic weapons might actually be more effective than the advanced energy weapons other species use. The hunters may not have defensive systems designed to handle primitive but powerful weapons. Primitive, the president repeated with a slight smile. I think you mean proven. American military technology has always focused on reliability and stopping power over elegance. If these aliens have been fighting energy weapons for millions of years, they might not know how to handle good old-fashioned explosives. Admiral Sullivan was already thinking about ship design and crew selection. We'd need our best people. Pilots with combat experience, engineers who can improvise under pressure, and soldiers who won't break under the stress of fighting completely unknown enemies. This wouldn't be a normal military deployment. No, it wouldn't, President Brooks agreed. This would be humanity announcing itself to the galaxy. The question is, what kind of impression do we want to make? The president walked to the windows overlooking the Rose Garden and considered the weight of the decision. Throughout American history, the nation had answered calls for help from around the world. From the beaches of Normandy to the mountains of Afghanistan, Americans had fought and died to protect people they had never met. Now the call was coming from the stars themselves. General Morrison, I want you to activate Project Hercules immediately. Dr. Torres, you have unlimited resources and authority to build whatever you need. Admiral Sullivan, I want you to select a crew and prepare for humanity's first interstellar combat mission. The orders were given with quiet authority, but their impact would echo across the galaxy. In shipyards around the world, construction began on the USS Defiance, humanity's first true starship. The vessel combined human engineering with barely understood alien technology, creating something that had never existed before. Nuclear missiles were modified for space combat. Railguns were scaled up to ship-killing proportions. Armor plating was designed to absorb impacts that no human weapon had ever generated. Captain Jake Murphy was selected to command the mission. He was a former Navy SEAL who had transitioned to the new Space Force when it became clear that humanity's future lay among the stars. His record showed a man who could make impossible decisions under extreme pressure and bring his people home alive. He would need all those skills for what was coming. As construction continued on the Defiance, the Zalani continued to broadcast their desperate pleas for help. Each transmission was weaker than the last as their civilization collapsed under the relentless assault of the Void Hunters. Time was running out and humanity was racing to build a ship that could cross the galaxy in time to matter. The question was whether they would arrive as saviors or simply as the next species to fall to the darkness between the stars. The USS Defiance launched from Luna Base on a Tuesday morning with no fanfare or media coverage. Captain Jake Murphy watched Earth shrink in the view screen as his ship accelerated away from humanity's home system. The crew of 200 represented the best that 8 billion people could offer. They were pilots who had learned to fly before they could legally drive, engineers who built fusion, reactors as weekend projects, and soldiers who had volunteered, knowing they might never see home again. Lieutenant Commander Beth Adams stood beside Murphy on the bridge studying the tactical displays. She had graduated first in her class from the Naval War College and spent the last 5 years developing combat doctrines for space warfare that had never been tested. Now she would find out if her theories worked against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. The Alcubierre drive engaged with a sound like thunder tearing through reality. Space twisted around the Defiance as the ship slipped into a bubble of compressed space-time that carried it faster than light toward the Kepler system. Dr. Torres, had been right about the drive working but wrong about the experience. The journey felt like falling through an endless tunnel of stars while reality bent and flexed around them. Chief Engineer Carlos Martinez spent the first week of the journey making modifications to every system on the ship. The Defiance had been built in 6 months using a combination of human engineering and alien technology that nobody fully understood. Martinez knew that improvisation and quick thinking would be more valuable than perfect design when they reached their destination. Captain, the nuclear missiles are ready for space combat, Martinez reported during the daily briefing. We've modified the warheads for maximum electromagnetic pulse effect. If these hunters rely on electronic systems, our nukes should scramble their circuits even if they don't penetrate their armor. Dr. Amy Watson was working around the clock to establish communication with the surviving Zilani. Each day brought weaker transmissions from the dying civilization as the Void Hunters continued their systematic destruction. Through the static-filled messages, she learned about crystalline technology that grew like living things and a culture that had never known war until now. The Zilani are fascinating, Watson told Murphy during one of their evening briefings. They've spent their entire evolutionary history as a peaceful species. Their weapons are designed to disable, not kill. They literally cannot comprehend the level of violence needed to stop the hunters. Murphy studied the translated messages from Commander Lyrics and felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. He had seen this before in Afghanistan and Syria, where peaceful people faced enemies who understood only force. The difference was that this time the stakes were not just one country or region, but an entire civilization among the stars. The crew trained relentlessly during the 3-week journey. In the ship's combat simulator, they fought endless battles against computer-generated hunter vessels. The simulations were based on data from the Zilani transmissions, and they painted a grim picture. Hunter ships were massive constructs that could bend reality itself to their will. Their weapons could tear holes in space-time, and their defenses could absorb the energy output of entire stars. The good news is that they've never faced anything like us, Adams told her tactical team during one training session. Every species they've conquered used advanced energy weapons and exotic matter shields. We're bringing nuclear explosives and kinetic projectiles to a particle beam fight. Sergeant Rick Collins led the ship's Marine contingent through boarding drills that pushed the limits of human endurance. If they had to fight inside hunter vessels, they would face conditions that no human had ever experienced. Artificial gravity that could change direction without warning. Atmosphere that might be toxic or absent entirely. Corridors designed for machines, not living beings. Remember that these things have been conquering civilizations for millions of years, Collins told his Marines. They think they know everything about warfare. Let's show them something new. As the Defiance approached the Kepler system, the crew received their first visual confirmation of what they were up against. Long-range sensors detected massive objects moving between the planets. Hunter harvesting ships, each the size of Manhattan, were stripping entire worlds down to their cores. The scale of destruction was beyond anything in human experience. Murphy called the senior staff to the bridge as they prepared to drop out of hyperspace. Through the view screen, they could see the Kepler system burning. 17 worlds that had supported billions of beings were now empty husks. The space between planets was filled with debris fields that had once been cities and starships. There, Watson pointed to a fading energy signature near the 4th planet. That's Haven's Rest, the last Zilani stronghold. Commander Lyrics estimates they have maybe 6 hours before the hunters break through their shields. The Zilani habitat was a beautiful, crystalline structure that housed nearly 1 million survivors. It spun slowly in space like a jewel catching starlight while hunter attack craft swarmed around it like angry insects. The reality distortion weapons were already beginning to crack the crystal walls as the station's defenses failed. Murphy watched a civilization die in real time and felt something cold settle in his chest. He had seen genocide before, but never on this scale. The hunters were not just killing the Zilani. They were erasing every trace that the species had ever existed. Their art, their music, their 1,000-year history of peaceful development was being fed into machines that cared only about raw materials and energy. Captain, we're detecting hunter fleet movements, Adams reported from the tactical station. Multiple harvester ships and what looks like a command vessel. Conservative estimate puts their total tonnage at 50 times our displacement. The odds were impossible by any reasonable measure. One human ship against an armada that had never known defeat. But Murphy had spent his career doing impossible things with insufficient resources. He looked around the bridge at faces that showed determination instead of fear, and made the decision that would change galactic history. All hands battle stations. Murphy's voice carried throughout the ship. We didn't come this far to watch good people die. Let's show these machines what humans do to bullies. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace directly into the Hunter formation as alarms sounded throughout the ship. For the first time in millions of years, the Void Hunters would face an enemy that had come looking for a fight. The first Hunter ship died before it knew humans existed. The USS Defiance materialized from hyperspace at point-blank range and launched every nuclear missile in its forward tubes. The warhead struck the massive harvester vessel at relativistic speeds, turning its crystalline hull into superheated plasma. The explosion lit up the Kepler system like a second sun as millions of tons of alien machinery vaporized in nuclear fire. Captain, Murphy felt the deck shudder under his feet as the Defiance rode the shockwave from its own weapons. Around him, the bridge crew worked with calm efficiency as damage reports flooded in from all sections. The surprise attack had worked, but now they faced the wrath of an entire Hunter fleet that had never been challenged in living memory. Lieutenant Commander Adams watched her tactical display update with new contacts as Hunter ships throughout the system turned toward the human vessel. Captain, I'm reading 43 Hunter vessels converging on our position. The largest one appears to be their command ship. It's 3 times the size of anything we've seen before. The Hunter response was swift and brutal. Reality warping weapons reached out across space to tear the human ship apart, but found nothing where the Defiance had been. Chief Martinez had pushed the engines past all safety limits, turning the ship into a blur of motion that danced between attacks that could crack planets. The Hunters had spent millions of years fighting civilizations that relied on heavy shields and slow-moving battle formations. They had no experience with opponents who used speed and unpredictability as their primary defense. All batteries open fire, Murphy ordered as the Defiance swept through the Hunter formation like an angry hornet. Railguns that could accelerate tungsten slugs to 20% of light speed hammered at targets of opportunity. Nuclear missiles found gaps in Hunter defenses and detonated with the fury of miniature stars. Human weapons designed for simple destruction carved through exotic alien armor that had never been tested against such primitive brutality. Dr. Watson coordinated with the surviving Zelani from her position at the communications station. Commander Lyrics and his people watched in amazement as the newcomers engaged the Hunters in direct combat. No species in recorded galactic history had ever willingly attacked the mechanical conquerors. The Zelani had expected their rescuers to use advanced shields and energy weapons like every other civilization they knew. Instead, they witnessed humans using their own ship as a weapon. The Hunters are adapting their shield frequencies to counter our energy weapons, Adams reported as her screens showed the enemy response. But their adaptive systems can't compensate for kinetic impacts and nuclear detonations. They've never faced weapons this crude before. Martinez proved that human engineering could accomplish miracles when motivated by desperation. When the main engines took damage, he rerouted power through the life support systems. When the primary railguns overheated from continuous firing, he jury-rigged backup weapons from spare parts and determination. The Defiance should have been destroyed within the first 10 minutes of combat, but human ingenuity kept it fighting against impossible odds. The turning point came when Sergeant Collins led his Marines in something that no sane being had ever attempted. As the Defiance rammed a damaged Hunter vessel, Collins and his team breached the alien hull with explosive charges and fought their way into corridors that had never been designed for biological life. Armed with flamethrowers and high explosives, they turned the Hunter ship's own systems against it. These machines don't expect boarding actions, Collins reported over the comm as his team planted charges throughout the Hunter vessel. Their internal defenses are designed to prevent system failures, not repel invaders. We're like a virus in their bloodstream. The Hunter ship died from within as human explosives severed crucial connections and turned sophisticated machinery into scrap metal. The sight of their own vessel being destroyed by primitive biological creatures sent shockwaves through the Hunter fleet. Their tactical algorithms had no protocols for dealing with enemies who used such chaotic and unpredictable methods. Murphy pressed the advantage as Hunter formations began to break apart under the relentless human assault. The Defiance might be outnumbered 50-1, but the Hunters had never faced an opponent who treated battle as a form of controlled insanity. When weapons failed, the humans improvised new ones. When systems broke down, they found ways to make them work anyway. When logic said they should retreat, they attacked even harder. Chief Martinez achieved the impossible when he managed to hack into the Hunter communication network using a virus based on Earth's most aggressive military AI. The program spread through the alien fleet like wildfire, turning their own ships against each other. Hunter vessels that had operated in perfect coordination for millions of years suddenly began firing on their own allies as their command systems became corrupted by human malware. The Hunter fleet is in complete disarray, Adams reported with barely contained excitement. Their command ship is trying to regain control, but our virus is spreading faster than they can contain it. Half their fleet is firing on the other half. The battle reached its climax when the massive Hunter command ship turned its reality-warping weapons on the Defiance at point-blank range. Space itself twisted around the human vessel as forces that could tear apart matter at the quantum level focused on destroying the upstart species that dared challenge the natural order. But Martinez had one last trick up his sleeve. The chief engineer overloaded every reactor on the ship and channeled the energy through the Alcubierre drive. Instead of warping space for travel, he used it as a weapon, reflecting the Hunter attack back on itself. The command ship's own reality-warping beam turned inside, out, and the massive vessel collapsed into a singularity that consumed itself and 3 nearby Hunter ships. As the last Hunter vessels fled into hyperspace, Captain Murphy's voice carried across every frequency in the system. This is Captain Jake Murphy of the USS Defiance, representing the United Earth Space Force. The threat has been neutralized. All survivors, please respond for immediate assistance. In the sudden silence that followed the most impossible victory in galactic history, Commander Lyrax finally found his voice. Captain Murphy, this is Commander Lyrax of the Zilani Defense Corps. We are in your debt forever. How can we ever repay you? Murphy's response would become legend throughout the galaxy. Someone sent an SOS, Commander. We don't ignore those. The silence that followed the battle was more terrifying than the war itself. Across the galaxy, subspace networks that had carried constant chatter between civilizations for millions of years went completely quiet. On the Altarian homeworld, High Chancellor Vex stared at sensor readings that should have been impossible. A single ship from an unknown species had accomplished what the combined might of 1,000 civilizations could not. The humans called themselves Earth's children, and they had just rewritten every rule of galactic warfare in the span of 6 hours. Vex watched the tactical recordings again and again, trying to understand what he had witnessed. These newcomers fought with weapons that belonged in museums, nuclear explosives and kinetic projectiles that any advanced species would consider primitive junk. Yet they had torn through Hunter defenses like they were made of paper. In the computer cores of the Nexus Empire, artificial intelligences ran probability calculations and returned results that made no sense. The mathematical models showed that humanity should have been destroyed within minutes of engaging the Hunters. Instead, they had turned the most feared force in the galaxy into scrap metal and energy signatures. The machines began updating their threat assessment protocols and ranking humanity as the most dangerous unknown variable in recorded history. The mystical ethereals felt a disturbance in the cosmic order that shook their dimensional sanctuaries. These humans radiated a chaotic energy that defied all known patterns of galactic development. They had bypassed centuries of technological evolution and somehow jumped directly to interstellar warfare, while maintaining the savage efficiency of a predator species that still remembered what it meant to hunt for survival. On the USS Defiance, Captain Murphy supervised the rescue operations as his crew worked to save the surviving Zilani. Haven's Rest was badly damaged but still habitable thanks to the quick response of human engineering teams. Chief Martinez and his people had the station's life support systems back online within hours, using replacement parts that had no business working with alien technology. Dr. Watson established the first formal diplomatic contact between humanity and an alien civilization, while coordinating the evacuation efforts. Commander Lyrax tried repeatedly to offer tribute or payment for the rescue, but the humans seemed genuinely confused by the concept. Captain Murphy's crew treated the entire operation as just another mission, showing no interest in conquest or territorial expansion. Your people saved us from extinction, Lyrax told Watson during one of their conversations. In our culture, that creates a debt that can never be fully repaid. What does humanity want from the Zilani? Watson translated the question to Murphy, who was overseeing repairs to the Defiance's damaged hull. The captain considered the question for a moment, then gave an answer that would define human foreign policy for generations to come. We want them to be safe and free to rebuild their civilization. That's all we ever wanted. The concept was so alien to galactic politics that Lyrics needed Watson to repeat the translation twice. Every other species he knew measured their interactions in terms of profit or strategic advantage. The idea that these powerful beings wanted nothing in return for their intervention challenged everything the Zilani understood about how advanced civilizations behaved. News of the battle spread through underground channels as intelligence networks tried to understand what humanity represented. Species that had ignored the Zilani's plea for help now sent urgent messages to Earth requesting immediate diplomatic contact. The small blue world on the galaxy's rim had become the most important system in known space overnight. President Brooks received the reports from the Defiance while standing in the Situation Room, surrounded by her senior advisors. The successful rescue of the Zilani had proven that humanity could project power across interstellar distances, but it had also announced Earth's existence to potentially hostile forces. The galaxy now knew that humans were capable of destroying anyone who threatened innocent life. Madam President, we're receiving first contact requests from over 200 different species, General Morrison reported as new messages continued to arrive. Some are offering trade agreements, others are asking for protection from various threats, and a few are demanding that we submit to their authority immediately. The President studied the flood of alien communications with growing amusement. Humanity had spent decades wondering if they were alone in the universe, only to discover that the galaxy was full of civilizations that wanted to tell them what to do. The irony was not lost on someone who had spent her political career dealing with similar attitudes from Earth's more arrogant nations. Draft a response for broadcast on all known communication frequencies, President Brooks instructed. Make it clear that Earth extends the hand of friendship to those who seek peace and prosperity for all sentient beings. But also make it clear that humanity protects its own, and our definition of our own includes anyone who calls for help. The message that went out from Earth became known as the Brooks Doctrine, and it changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Humanity would not seek conquest or expansion, but they would respond to any SOS with overwhelming force. The species that had turned away from the Zilani's desperate plea now lived in fear of the primitive newcomers who had redefined what it meant to be dangerous. Captain Murphy began the journey home with his mission accomplished and his crew intact. The Defiance had taken significant damage, but Martinez and his engineers had her ready for the return trip to Earth. As they prepared to enter hyperspace, Murphy received a final transmission from Commander Lyrics expressing the eternal gratitude of the Zilani people. The galaxy watched nervously as the human ship disappeared into the void, carrying news of their victory back to the small world that had produced such terrifying saviors. In the silence between the stars, a new truth echoed through every civilization that had received the Zilani's original distress call. When humanity heard an SOS, the universe held its breath to see who they would save next, and who they would have to destroy to do it. Within weeks of the Defiance's return to Earth, construction began on a dozen new starships. The message was clear to anyone watching from the depths of space. Humanity had answered their first call for help, and they were preparing to answer many more. The age of human expansion had begun not through conquest, but through compassion, and the galaxy would never be the same again.